Why fight? 3.1 Arjuna said, O Janardhana, Krishna, the divine liberator, if, as it seems, you consider understanding superior to action, why, O Kesava, have you been urging me to this terrible action? 3.2 This apparent contradiction confuses me. Please tell me clearly which path will help me towards the highest good. Arjuna is speaking on behalf of Sadhu everyman and playing the part of devil's advocate. Calling Krishna his guru and divine liberator, he says, O Janardhana, I am torn between the two duties you have given me. On the one hand, you tell me to become absorbed in the stillness of spirit. On the other hand, you say I must fight against my natural foes, my evil tendencies, both for my own good and for the benefit of others. Why can't I simply rest calmly and joyfully in the Supreme Self as you have also enjoined? Unfortunately, what is natural for the ego is far from natural for the self or soul. Spiritual progress is achieved not by the tense effort demanded for material success, but rather by a process of upward relaxation. Spiritual progress may be compared to a rising helium balloon. The balloon's ascent is natural and can be prevented only by ropes or by heavy ballast. Devotion and divine aspiration lifts the consciousness towards its source in God. Worldly desire and attachment and the habit of directing one's energy flow outward are the ropes and ballast that resist the upwardness of soul inspiration. Effort on the spiritual path may be compared to cutting the ropes which hold the balloon and pushing ballast out of the basket underneath. It seems contradictory to say that effort should be required at all, since the idea is to attain effortlessness. In fact, however, the divine state can be attained only by serious application, which is a kind of effort. Interestingly, however, that effort also implies relaxation upward with the energy flow in the spine which rises by a natural buoyancy towards the brain, and were it not for worldly samskars, ballast would take one ever deeper into meditation, because worldly achievement generally require stressful effort. Many people, when they take up the practice of meditation, try hard also to reach inner calmness. In fact, the key to right meditation is relaxation physically, emotionally, and mentally. The energy is drawn up the spine in response to another kind of gravity, the upward pull of spirit, which one feels first in the heart and then at the kutastha between the eyebrow, the seat of the spiritual eye. This is the pull of divine love. Its upward pull requires effort on the devotee's part only in the beginning to release it from the downward pull or ballast of material desires. Thus, the symbolism of Kurukshetra as a war is to fight and conquer one's own evil tendencies. The war fought, however, is primarily to rechannel upward the energy in the spine, which so far has activated those downward pulling tendencies. The upward flow of energy releases it from whatever tendencies in the worldly person have been pulling it downward. All the effort one invests spiritually should be in the direction of effortlessness. When efforts end in ease, as Paramhansa Yogananda expressed it. Sometimes it takes a very great effort of will to resist some particular habit or temptation and throw it out of the mind altogether. A certain man, a true story, wanted for once and for all to overcome his tendency towards alcoholism. One day, finding himself on the point of succumbing once again to that old evil habit, he suddenly became so enraged with himself that he removed from the cabinet all his bottles of whiskey, rum, etc., where he had been keeping them, carried them out of doors, and hurled them furiously on the ground. Every bottle was broken, and with their shattering, every attachment to drinking vanished from his consciousness forever. The vitreous devastation was only an outward expression of his inner and very firm emotional renunciation. Usually, such renunciation is accompanied by deep inner calmness, but in this man's case, evidently emotional revulsion was needed first to break his deep seated habit. A thorn, the Indian scripture suggests, can be used to extricate another one, after which both thorns may be discarded. Emotional rejection enabled this man to uproot the deeply embedded thorn of alcoholism after his emotional purging. Both the emotion and the habit were discarded. The point in this case is that emotion worked and was just what the man needed to free himself forever of his habit. That emotional act too, however, though it demanded both physical and mental effort, may be compared to simply having the ballast out of the basket under the balloon so that the balloon can rise of its own buoyancy. Sometimes, as was stated in the Imitation of Christ, a great Christian work which my Guru recommended, one must do violence to his lower nature in the name of ultimate ease. Such violence does not create an increase of tension, for its released desire and attachment instead of suppressing them. It should be added that the balloon may, after long disuse, have lost some of its buoyant gas. The spiritual aspirant must pump his balloon of aspiration again and again with fervent devotion and ever deeper meditation. He must repeatedly return the compass needle of his attention to the pole star of ultimate divine attainment. Admittedly, to do so requires effort, especially in the beginning. His effort will be increasing successful, however, the more he feels that what he is doing is a relaxation upward into the higher self rather than a process of driving his thoughts higher by grim willpower. The expression when efforts and in ease should be held aloof in the mind constantly like a banner by every meditator. It is the monkey standard which Arjuna held high to symbolize his control over mental restlessness. The need is not so much to develop love for God as to receive His love, to recognize love and joy as supremely relishable and as therefore the only thing in life worth having. Divine bliss is the most fulfilling of all possible attainment and therefore the only thing worthwhile to desire. Devotion is simply a response to God's call in the soul. High truth cannot be learned, they can only be remembered in the self. As the ancient sage Patanjali stated, divine enlightenment is attained by a process of smriti, divine recollection. When God is experienced, the soul recognizes what it has always known on deeper than conscious levels of consciousness, its own eternal reality. The spiritual part is full of apparent contradictions. Yogananda told the story of a master who said to a disciple, "You should eat and you should not eat." The disciple quite naturally objected, "Master, what you have said seems to me self contradictory." The contradiction, replied the master, is in your understanding. My advice is sound. You should feed your body healthfully to keep it alive and well, but you must resist the thought born of ego. I'm eating. Tell yourself rather, God is eating through me. Thus too must a person act in this world not with ego motivation, but as a God given duty and with the feeling that He alone indeed is the doer through His instrument. 3.3 The cosmic Lord said, O sinless one, at the beginning of creation I established two means by which men could achieve salvation. The first was by wisdom, the other was by right action. True wisdom means one thing only, the perception of Brahman and oneness with Him. Those who are blessed with this perception have no need for action at all. Yogananda told a story of Draupadi to whom Krishna once addressed the question, why don't you practice the yoga meditation techniques? I would love to, Lord, she replied, but how can I? I can't take my mind away from you long enough to do them. Hearing those words, the master concluded. Krishna only smiled. The path to yoga through wisdom actually begins with the vision of God. As one saint put it, I used to think that when I achieved Nirvikalpa Samadhi, my spiritual work would be finished. Instead, I discovered that with Nirvikalpa, it had only begun. Once one has realized oneness with God and understood that in everything one does, God alone performs his every action. From then on, not the ego, he must still recall and release into the infinite. All the action he performed in ego consciousness through countless past lives, the sum total of those lives may be many millions incarnations spent, let us say, as a pirate, a farmer, a stockbroker, a housewife, a warrior, a king, a beggar. The task of releasing the ego motivation behind billions of past deeds may seem overwhelming, comparable to turning each molecule in a bar of metal in a north-south direction to create a bar magnet. As we saw pages ago, considering that example and relating it to the magnetizing of the spine for spiritual unfoldment, two elements in the task of inward release are infinitely more importantly than turning each molecule individually north and south or then releasing one by one into the infinite all the deeds one ever committed in past lives. Paramhansa Yogananda said that deeply meditating yogi, even during even one meditation, can release deeds performed in delusion of an entire lifetime. Okay, let me repeat this. Paramhansa Yogananda said that deeply meditating yogi during even one meditation can release the deeds performed in delusion of an entire lifetime. The yogi sweeps the light of superconsciousness, so to speak, over the entire panorama of that incarnation, beholding God as the one who acted in all of them, even his misdeeds. Thus, the yogi doesn't have to view each deed, rather, he sees the sweep of energy as it moves throughout that incarnation. God, it is in reality who acts even when parts he play are those of villains. Saturn himself is when the whole tale is told an instrument of God. As my guru puts it, the villain is needed in a play to make you love the hero, and villainy in one's own past is needed over many incarnations to bring one to the point where he realized that doing harm to others never succeeded in bringing him happiness, nor was there any real fulfillment for him until he had learned to offer up his ego into a more expanded peace and harmony. The Jivan Mukta, freed while living, having been released forever from ego consciousness, must recall all those lives when he lived in ego consciousness and must see himself as never having been anything but an individual manifestation of the Lord himself. This part of wisdom leads to the highest state, Kaivalsa Moksha, complete liberation. I once asked my guru, how long does one remain a Jivan Mukta before he achieves full liberation? In that state, he replied, you don't care. Indeed, there is no you to care. You may use your need to clear your karma of the past as an excuse to come back and help other, or you may say simply, I am free and be free in God forever. At this point, a brother disciple of mine, as I mentioned in conversations with Yogananda, said, but if I myself said I'm free, I wouldn't be free, would I? Oh, yes, the Guru replied. But the thing is, you answered your own question. You said I wouldn't be. He then told the story also quoted earlier about the man who tried to rid himself of a demon by chanting a Vedic incantation over a handful of powder and then casting it on the demon. The demon mocked him, saying, before you could even say your incantation, I myself got into the powder. Yogananda then explained, the very mind with which you would affirm freedom is already infected with the disease of delusion. That is why you must first reach the high state of consciousness. Only then can your affirmation of freedom be effective. At that state, at that stage, it is no longer the I that says I am free. Of the saints described in Autobiography of a Yogi, very few had attained full liberation. I spent several days with one such Param Mukta, so my Guru described him, though he had not included him in his autobiography. I said to the saint, with all that you have attained, why have you so few disciples? God has done what he wants to do with this body, was his simple reply. In this state, there is no I to care one way or another about anything. The goal has been reached. Intellectuals may consider it their nature to incline towards the path of wisdom. It takes more than intellect, however, to enter even the lower samadhi state of sabhikalpa. As my guru stated in the chapter Experience in Cosmic Consciousness in Autobiography of a Yogi, the experience can never be given through one's mere intellectual willingness or open mindedness. Only adequate enlargement by yoga practice and devotional bhakti can prepare the mind to absorb the liberating shock of omnipresence. Yogananda's great mystical poem, Samadhi, which will be quoted in full later on in this book during the discussion of Arjuna's divine vision, omitted in last edition by an inexplicable editorial emendation, a number of important lines. Among the omitted lines was the following: by deeper, longer, thirsty, Guru given meditation comes the celestial Samadhi. Salvation comes, as indeed does every manifestation of creation, through an instrument of God and not directly from spirit. In this case, the divine instrument is the Guru. Thus, for practical needs, Krishna tells the devotee to follow the path of yoga. As he declares later on in the Gita, Arjuna, be thou a yogi. Meditative activity and not just any set of religiously motivated actions is implicit in what Krishna says here. As the apple blossom already contains the apple and is inseparable from the final product, so yoga practice is inseparable from its ultimate fruit, union with the infinite. It must be strictly understood that the term yoga is not limited to specific meditative practices taught initially thousands of years ago in India by great rishis or sages. Spiritual seekers in any religion, if they pray and meditate sincerely, may rightly be termed yogis. A certain great Roman Catholic mystic in Italy was approached by a friend of mine who, during his traditional confession, told the mystic he practiced Kriya Yoga. Hush, the mystic replied, it is better not to let anyone, other priests specially, know. However, he added, you are doing the right thing. The eightfold, more literally the eight-limbed or Ashtanga part of yoga, outlined by the ancient sage Patanjali, was not describing one particular path to God. All who seek to unite their souls with God must follow the same path. Yama and niyama, right action; asana, firmness of posture and keeping the spine straight so as to enable the energy to flow freely through it; pranayama, control over the energy of the body; pratyahara, interiorization of the mind; dharana, one-pointed concentration; dhyana, absorption in deep meditation; and samadhi, oneness. Samadhi, as we saw earlier, is both conditioned and unconditioned. Conditioned, limited first in Sabhikalpa, for the subtle bonds of ego consciousness still remains to be wholly severed, and Nirbhikalpa, unconditioned by limitation of any kind. One who attains Nirbhikalpa Samadhi has reached the highest state there is. He has only to rid himself of memories of past incarnation or ego identification. Otherwise, he is like Christ, Krishna, and Buddha. From oneness with God, it is impossible to rise any higher. Religionists often claim for their own founders a state above that of any other saint or master. No such state exists, as Yogananda once put it. When you become one with God, you are God. Indeed, there is no you to be anything else. Thus, when Krishna told Arjuna to be a yogi, he doesn't mean necessarily to be a Hindu yogi. All those in every religion who sincerely seek God walk the same path, ultimately speaking, for their devotion turns them inward to experience Him. It cannot be otherwise. The benefit of the path of yoga, as it was taught classically and specifically the part of Kriya Yoga, is that its scientific technique accomplishes more directly what the most earnest devotion can only accomplish indirectly. Yogananda once met a sincere bhakti yogi, a follower of the path of devotion, and seeing his sincerity urged him to accept initiation into Kriya Yoga. The man demurred, saying that he had been following the path of bhakti yoga since for 20 years and was loyal to that, although he admitted, I am yet to experience God. Yogananda explained to him, you have been in a room for 20 years trying to get out through the walls, the ceiling, the floor, but no one has shown you where the door is. Kriya Yoga will take you by the door of the spine. I am not trying to change your allegiance. I am only saying, here is the door. Open it and walk through into the free air of divine attainment. Finally, he accepted my suggestion. Within a few time, he attained the experience of God which he had been seeking for so many years. It must be understood that the Bhagavad Gita is for everyone, but not only for those who can meditate deeply. It is indeed for even the most worldly of human beings. It points the way for everyone to find the fulfillment of happiness, then joy, then perfect bliss that all men seek. Most of them, alas, blindly groping in darkness with no sense of direction. The Gita says, this is the way you are all seeking. Nothing sought in any other direction will ever give you what you yourself so ardently desire. Blindly though it is, and in ignorance of what life is all about, what you seek is the mystery of your own being. Thus, in chapter on Karma Yoga, the part of spiritual action deals with all action and with the way to direct action towards the realization of God. The important point to remember is that the goal of Karma Yoga is not to please God. It is, in a true sense, to please one's self. That is to say, it is to find bliss in one's own divine self. This is also the message of every true scripture. Do that what will bring you not pleasure and not even mere human happiness, but bliss. To emphasize the ego and its narrow self interest is the pathway to hell. To de emphasize it by expanding one's sympathies and awareness is the pathway to heaven. Ultimately, the true heaven which all seek is Satchidananda, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. Thus, what action is spiritual, which minimizes one's emphasis on the ego and on everything that feeds ego consciousness, desires, attachment, and every warrior in the whole army of Kauravas. 3.4 Actionlessness cannot be attained by mere inaction. One who forsakes work in the name of divine aloofness from activity cannot reach perfection. It is to set an example for their disciples that fully liberated masters who return to this world as avatars, incarnations of God, engage themselves in various spiritually uplifting activities. Sometimes, indeed, they even participate in world emancipating tasks such as Krishna assumed in killing the demonic Kamsa. Avatars live as willing participants in the divine drama of creation. Their lives are also intended, however, to serve as examples to devotees by showing them that it is important for everyone to be actively engaged in self liberation, each one according to his own complex network of karma. My guru explained that a liberated master, whatever his role on earth, never loses his inner awareness of freedom. 3.5 No one can remain actionless for even a moment. All are compelled by nature, whether willingly or unwillingly, to be active, driven by the gunas, the three qualities of nature. 3.6 The person who restrains his organs of action but in whose mind rotate the thoughts of sense object is rightly regarded as a hypocrite and is self deluded. Imagine utter motionlessness, no wind, no passing clouds, no ocean waves, no rising or setting of sun and moon, no changing of the season, no growing things, no decay, no birth of life, no thoughts, no whirling atoms, and because no movement exists, therefore no space, and finally, since no movement, therefore no time. What utter folly in so called philosophers, sophisticated thinkers, and aspiring truth seekers to imagine that the actionless state of Supreme Spirit is attainable by merely not acting. Can they cease from breathing by merely not breathing? Can they refrain from thinking by merely not thinking? Can they achieve silence by merely not speaking? One wonders how an aspirant to wisdom can conceive such absurdities. All creation exists in a vibratory state. The very atoms are constantly in movement. Prakriti, nature, forces men to be active. Anyone who tries to be inactive become merely lazy. Anyone who pretends to be disinvolved in the world around him is being merely hypocritical. In order to achieve the actionless state, it is utterly necessary to act consciously, not merely driven by nature, but deliberately and intelligently like a surfer going with the wave of circumstance. 3.7 That man, however, succeeds supremely, O Arjuna, who disciplines his senses by an effort of mind, remain inwardly non-attached and engages his organ of activity in God reminding activities. What let us first consider are God reminding activities. They include every deed and thought which lifts the mind towards superconsciousness. Mere pity expressed prayers in church, temple, synagogue, mere holy sentiments display displayed to impress others or even uttered fervently to impress God. In short, any depth of religiosity is acceptable only according to the depth of inner sincerity involved. The wish to impress indicates a desire for results rather than true sincerity of feelings. Krishna's expression. Disciplining his senses by an effort of mind suggests the importance of not adopting merely outward means of self discipline, standing or sitting, for example, with one hand upraised until it withers from disuse, standing but never sitting nor lying down as a mode of penance, lying on a bed of thorns. This plus long fast, sleep deprivation, or other means of sense starvation designed for learning self control but without a corresponding attempt at intelligent discrimination are not what Krishna is recommending here. Similar austerities in other religions include such practices as self flagellation, self starvation, and many practices similar to ones used in India. To list them all would be futile, inasmuch as all of them are intended to subdue the senses without proper use of the will. For inner freedom, the will must give its active consent to inward release. It is useless to beat the body in an effort to force it into submission. Sense control is never a question of bullying the senses. What must be done is withdraw the energy from them. The will act directly upon the flow of energy. Yogananda stated, the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The direction of that flow can be inward as well as outward, upward as well as downward. Therefore, also Krishna speaks of inner non attachment. Depriving oneself of material things may and often does feed the hidden fires of attachment. No activity engaged in merely to impress others or even God will in the end bear divine fruit. Spiritual progress is achieved above all by desiring it intensely and not by inflicting violent discipline on the body. With a willing attitude, with joy and devotion, it is possible to find God. Without the wholehearted assent of one's will and of one's whole consciousness, that noblest of all ends, the pure consciousness of bliss itself cannot be achieved. 3.8 Perform those actions Perform those actions which your duty dictates, for action is better than inaction. Without action, indeed, even the act of maintaining life in the body would not be possible. The duty of every man is that which is particularly his own, ordained for him by the karmic bonds he himself has forged and must untie to release himself from attachment to the ego. Only thus can his consciousness soar in infinity. One's dutiful actions are not necessarily the activities of which he has special skill. The spiritual duty of a person with a talent for acting, for example, may not be to become an actor. He may be very good at pretending to be someone else, yet have an active need to be wholly sincere as to who he himself is. He may have the magnetism to win plaudits from his audiences as an actor, yet may in the process bind himself more firmly to pride by his very success. That is not to say that acting is universally a dangerous career. Karmically speaking, it may help some people to become less identified and therefore less limited by their own personalities. Acting may help some people also to realize more deeply that life itself is a play in which nothing in the last analysis is real. The complexity of karmic pattern in human life makes virtually every honest activity a dharmic duty for someone. The menial task of street sweeping may for most people be simple, a paying job, a social necessity, but for some people it may be a karmic duty. If, for example, the sweeper lived in the past incarnation an idle squalor, the exalted job of president of large corporation might be merely a burden for some people and a cause of further karmic involvement owing perhaps to a lurking desire of for self-importance. For someone, however, who treats the position as an opportunity to serve others and to promote a good cause, it can be a step towards liberation from the ego. How is one to know his karmic duty? Few people, it must be admitted, are very close to recognizing the abyss which separates the ego from cosmic consciousness, with innumerable karmic battles remaining to be fought before their mental troops can make any significant advancement into enemy territory. It may be best simply to tackle whatever challenge lies closest to hand. Again, it is often best to undertake the first dose battle which one can be more confident of winning. For example, suppose someone is unable at present to conquer his sex drive, in which case to try to overcome it may only weaken his will all the more, for each time he fails will become for him a reaffirmation of his weakness. Far better would it then in his case to undertake an easier task which once overcome would strengthen his willpower and prepare him gradually for much greater challenge still awaiting him. For one who is fortunate enough to have a true God realized Guru, the sage advice given to him is precious, beyond any chest of diamonds and rubies. Obedience to his slightest word will be your raft over the roiling seas of delusions. 3.9 Actions performed for selfish gain are karmically binding. Therefore, O son of Kunti, that is to say, of dispassion, perform your duty without attachment, in a spirit of religious self-offering. The religious rite of yajna, my guru preferred this transliteration over the scholarly version yajna, symbolically offer the ego self into the sacrificial fire for purification. One who aspires to liberation should do everything in the spirit of self-offering to God. God's power itself then is symbolized by the fire of yajna. Visualize yourself every night before going to sleep, offering every thought and feeling that is centered in the ego. Self congratulation, for example, self abasement, and any self justification, along with every desire and attachment into the blazing fire of God's love.